thought that the study of philosophy was analogous to tending a garden. We need a good fence to keep weeds and animals out. We also need good and fertile soil. And out of our efforts, we will get beautiful flowers and delicious fruits. The fence is the study of logic, allowing us to reason correctly about things. And the fertile soil is what they call physics, helping us to form an understanding of how the world works. Let's examine what is arguably the most important part, the ethics, the fruits of our garden. If you look up the terms ethics and morality in a dictionary, you'll see they're used largely as synonyms, meaning something like the standards that govern right and wrong conduct. A moral or ethical person is construed as someone who tends to behave according to general standards of morality or ethics. An immoral person is one who fails to do so. In the ancient world, however, ethics and morality referred not to right and wrong per se, but rather to the character of an individual. So the fundamental question was not, is this action moral or immoral, but instead, is this person virtuous or unvirtuous? The words ethics and morality have revealing roots. The first comes from the Greek ethikos, relating to character, and the second from the Latin morales, having to do with habits and customs. Morales is how the Latin writer Cicero, one of the first philosophers of the Roman world, translated the Greek ethikos. It's important to appreciate the difference between ancient and modern conceptions of ethics, because it's a key to understanding how Stoic philosophy works and how to practice it. Modern moral systems are supposed to apply universally, looking at human behavior from a God's eye point of view. Modern morality aspires to formulate universal rules of conduct, valid regardless of the specific situation. The two most common modern ethical frameworks are Kantian deontology and utilitarianism. Deontology means duty-based. The Judeo-Christian Ten Commandments, for instance, are deontological, articulating 10 universal rules of conduct. Do not kill, do not steal, do not covet another's wife, and so forth. During the Enlightenment, the modern philosopher Immanuel Kant sought to establish morality on a rational rather than religious basis. He arrived at a single commandment known as the categorical imperative. It holds that we should act only according to that maxim whereby we can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. In other words, we should strive to act according to how we wish everyone would act. For instance, if you're wondering whether lying is ethical or not, think of what the world would be like if everyone were allowed to lie all the time. Civil intercourse would be impossible. So lying is not ethical, period, no exceptions. Utilitarianism was first articulated by Jeremy Bentham, who lived from 1748 to 1832, and revised by his student, John Stuart Mill, who lived from 1806 to 1873. Utilitarians think that what is right is whatever increases the happiness of most people, or whatever decreases the pain of most people. Kantian deontology and utilitarianism both have their critics and supporters. But that's not our concern here. The point is that ancient Greco-Romans would have been puzzled by the whole notion that there can be a system of morals based on a God's eye view. Right or wrong behavior depends on the circumstances. Often, lying is indeed wrong, but occasionally it can be the right thing to do. Imagine you were hiding a Jewish family in the basement of your house during the Nazi occupation. A Nazi officer knocks at your door and asks you if you are harboring any Jews. Quite obviously, I think, you would lie to the Nazi officer. Or consider the notion of happiness. At some point, most people were downright unhappy with, say, gay rights. And yet, we changed our laws because it was the right, if not the utilitarian, thing to do. The Greco-Roman approach, of which Stoicism is a prominent example, is known as virtue ethics. Not only is it distinct from most approaches in modern moral philosophy, it has a different focus and asks an altogether different question. The focus is on the character of the person, not on individual actions. And the question asked is not whether a given action is right or wrong, but rather whether the individual is improving as a human being. Even ethics itself, as a field of inquiry, is conceived in radically different ways today compared to ancient philosophy. Modern ethics is in essence the study of right and wrong. Ancient ethics was the study of how to live one's life, and it is to that broader meaning that we now turn. If ethics, as approached by the Stoics, is the study of how to live one's life, then we are assuming that there are better and worse ways to live, as opposed to the relativist attitude of anything goes. For the sake of discussion, let's agree that this is true. What guidance can we possibly find other than human opinion when consciously deciding to live our life one way rather than another? Pretty much all schools of Hellenistic philosophy, including Stoicism, offer the same general answer: nature. We should live according to nature, or following nature. But what does that mean? Here, the various philosophies differed. The Stoics gave one answer, the Epicureans a different one, the Cynics a third, the Skeptics a fourth one, and so forth. On one thing, however, they agreed. Living according to nature does not mean that whatever is natural is good. Indeed, that notion is known in modern philosophy as an appeal to nature, and it's considered a logical fallacy. The Stoics, Epicureans, Cynics, and Skeptics were too smart to fall prey to this error in reasoning. The appeal to nature approach can be shown to be problematic by coming up with counterexamples. If you think what is natural is good, then why do you go to a doctor when you're struck by disease? Or why don't you put poisonous mushrooms on your dinner table? Why do you seek shelter when a hurricane or earthquake strikes? Why speak of natural disasters at all? So, to live according to nature cannot possibly mean that whatever is natural is good. But then, what does it mean? The answer is found in theories of human nature and the connection between science and ethics. We know that human beings are members of a particular species of primates known as Homo sapiens. We are relatively close cousins of other primates like the bonobos, chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, while less to other mammals and even further removed from plants and bacteria. Now consider one of our distant relatives, say a tomato plant, scientifically known as Solanum lycopersicum. What counts as a good life for such a species? Any decent biologist, and a lot of people who grow tomatoes in their backyard, will tell you that tomatoes need a certain amount of water, nutrients in the soil, and lots of sunlight. They also should be shielded from parasites and herbivores. So, by understanding the biology of tomatoes, one is able to tell what counts as a good or bad life for a tomato. Humans are a lot more complicated than tomatoes, but we are biological beings nonetheless. So, at a minimum, we know that humans need food and shelter to survive. Still, surviving isn't the same as flourishing. As to the empirical question of what factors make human life good, here's where the various Hellenistic schools diverged in opinion. They diverged because they put forth different theories of human nature, thereby giving different priorities to distinct factors that contribute to human flourishing. The Stoics thought that there are two major characteristics that, when combined, distinguish us from any other living species on the planet. The fact that we are highly social, and that we are capable of sophisticated reasoning. Here's how the commentator Diogenes Laertius summarizes the Stoic position in his Lives and Opinions of Eminent Philosophers. He wrote, "This is why Zeno, in his work on human nature, said that the goal is to live in harmony with nature, which means to live according to virtue, for nature leads us to virtue." There are, of course, other social species. Ants, bees, and termites come to mind. But even though social insects are capable of sophisticated behaviors, they act more like genetically programmed automata than beings endowed with volition. They do what they do without reflecting on whether it's right or wrong. Social primates, by contrast, are a different and more sophisticated class. Orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, and bonobos are all smart animals. And primatologists have suggested that, at least in the case of the bonobos, they display the rudiments of moral behavior. For instance, they help each other, even among non-relatives, and intervene when members of their own group behave unfairly toward other members of the group, sometimes going so far as to punish them. Still, there are no bonobo treatises on moral philosophy, or any other subject for that matter. It is only Homo sapiens who are capable of interacting in sophisticated ways with members of their own species, particularly through language. If this analysis is correct, and the Stoics are right that the two most important characteristics of our species are our sociability and our ability to think rationally, then we have a pretty good hint at what makes a human life good. In addition to such basics as food and shelter, we need to live in social groups to which we feel connected, and we need to use our brains to feel satisfied. We can survive in isolation, but nobody thrives outside of a social group. As for using our brains to feel satisfied, no doubt we know plenty of people who don't use their brains that much. Some of them are mighty proud of that fact. Even so, human beings use their brains far more than any other species on Earth. And what do they use them for? To solve problems, especially the sort of problems that get in the way of living a good life. There is scientific evidence to show that our brains get flooded with pleasure hormones whenever we're able to apply our intelligence to solve a problem or discover a hidden pattern. That's what happens when you solve a crossword puzzle or figure out how to fix the toilet, or anything else you put your mind to. Given all this, what the Stoics thought begins to make sense. A good human life, a life worth living, is one in which we apply our ability to reason to improve the cosmopolis, society at large. The Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius said, "As you yourself are a component part of a social system, so let every act of yours be a component part of social life." In a sense, history has vindicated the Stoic insight. The history of humanity has been one of making things better for ourselves, not just practically, through technology, but also ethically, through the development of laws that are better, more fair, and more inclusive. You might be inclined to disagree given ongoing political and social turmoil. You might even think that there are signs of backsliding. But ask yourself a crucial question and answer it honestly. Would you rather trade life in the 21st century, at least in the most socially progressive countries, with life anywhere else in any other time? I am betting the answer is no. Now, if the theory underpinning Stoic ethics is that we should live in a way informed by human nature, how do we translate this notion into everyday practice? What does it mean to use reason to improve the human cosmopolis? The answer is twofold. The first bit concerns Stoicism's cardinal virtues: practical wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. But before we examine these in some detail, let's talk about the idea of virtue in general. A virtue is simply a behavioral disposition, which means that it is a reflection of someone's character. For instance, some people are prone to be generous with their time or their finances or in other ways. Generosity is a virtue, and it reflects well on the character of the person who offers it. The opposite of a virtue is a vice. For instance, the opposite of generosity is stinginess, and nobody thinks that a stingy person has a good character. Of course, things are not binary. There are degrees of generosity or stinginess. And indeed, the same person may be more or less generous or stingy over time, or depending on the circumstances. Still, we praise generosity and criticize stinginess. And we think the more consistently a person is generous, the more virtuous she is. That said, nowadays the word virtue is often associated with the Christian concept that focuses on things like chastity, purity, and so forth. The Dominican friar Thomas Aquinas systematized Christian virtues during his lifetime in the 13th century. According to Aquinas, there are 7 virtues. 4 of them the same cardinal virtues recognized by the Stoics: practical wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. The additional 3 come from Paul of Tarsus and are faith, hope, and charity. The Greek word used by the Stoics in this context is arete, which is often translated as virtue, but more precisely means excellence. In an important sense, the Stoics are telling us that we should try to be excellent human beings, or the best human beings we can be. Why should we focus on the Stoics' 4 cardinal virtues instead of some other frameworks such as Aquinas' 7 virtues? Or perhaps a group of virtues derived from a different philosophical framework altogether, like Confucianism? There are 2 answers to this question. The first is that Stoicism is certainly not the only approach to a eudaimonic life, a life worth living. If Christianity or Buddhism or Confucianism or some other philosophy better fits your cultural background or personality, go for it. But this is a course on Stoicism, so I'll stick to the cardinal virtues. The second answer is that empirical evidence suggests that human cultures appear to universally recognize a small number of virtues, and that includes the Stoic virtues. To be specific, psychologist Catherine Dalsgaard and collaborators have published a paper entitled Shared Virtue: The Convergence of Valued Human Strengths Across Culture and History. In it, the authors conduct a comparative analysis of the concept of virtue across a number of cultures with long traditions of written philosophy: Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, Hinduism, Athenian philosophy, mostly Plato and Aristotle, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. They discover 6 core virtues across the surveyed traditions: courage, justice, humanity, temperance, wisdom, and transcendence. Other than the 4 cardinal virtues, then, we have humanity and transcendence. However, humanity and transcendence are also found within the Stoic tradition, except that they're not treated as virtues. Instead, humanity corresponds to the Stoic notion of cosmopolitanism, the idea that we're all brothers and sisters and should help each other. Transcendence in Stoicism is the notion that we are part of the cosmic whole and should appreciate the relation in which we stand as a part to that whole. So one reason to take Stoicism seriously is that its list of virtues and other philosophically important notions corresponds to that of many other religions and philosophies of life. All these sages can't be wrong, can they? Let's take a closer look at the Stoic cardinal virtues, using Plato's Dictionary of Philosophical Terms as they were used in antiquity. Practical wisdom is the ability which by itself is productive of human happiness, the knowledge of what is good and bad, the knowledge that produces happiness, the disposition by which we judge what is to be done and what is not to be done. Different Hellenistic schools disagreed on what the knowledge of what is good and bad consists of. For the Epicureans, what is truly good for us is pleasure, and what is truly bad is pain, a fairly commonsensical notion. The Stoics, however, disagreed. They maintained that the only things that are truly good or bad for us are our own good or bad judgments, respectively. Everything else might have value, but it falls in the broad categories of preferred or dispreferred indifference. We need to talk about these apparently oxymoronic phrases for a moment. Indifferent in Stoic lingo doesn't mean that we don't care about it. For instance, health, wealth, and education are preferred indifference. Correspondingly, sickness, poverty, and ignorance are dispreferred indifference. But these things do not in themselves make us better or worse human beings. What matters is how we use them. One can be poor and yet have good character and be helpful to others. Another can be rich and yet have a stingy character and not be interested in improving the human cosmopolis. You get the point. But why is it that the only things that are truly good or bad for us are our judgments? The answer is because those are the only things we truly control. If we rely on externals such as health, wealth, or education in order to be happy, we leave our happiness in the hands of luck, out of our direct control. Let's now consider the second virtue, courage. Plato defines it as the state of the soul which is unmoved by fear, self-restraint in the soul about what is fearful and terrible, being intrepid in the face of death, the state which stands on guard over correct thinking in dangerous situations, force of fortitude in respect of virtue, and calm in the soul about what correct thinking takes to be frightening or encouraging things. While we typically associate the word courage with physical bravery, especially in battle, the Stoics use the term with a moral connotation, particularly in the sense of having the fortitude to do the right thing. And what is the right thing to do? That's the province of the third virtue, justice, which classically is defined as the unanimity of the soul with itself and the good discipline of the parts of the soul with respect to each other and concerning each other. The state that distributes to each person according to what is deserved. The state on account of which its possessor chooses what appears to him to be just. Social equality. Notice that a just person is one who is at peace with herself or himself, according to the Stoics. And this peace is reached precisely by our conscious work to achieve social justice, to treat others fairly. Finally, temperance is moderation of the soul concerning the desires and pleasures that normally occur in it. Harmony and good discipline in the soul in respect of normal pleasures and pains. The state by which its possessor chooses and is cautious about what he should. Temperance is about self-control, of course. But again, as in the case of courage, particularly self-control applied to morally salient situations, not just to what we eat at dinner. Though that's certainly a healthy place to start practicing temperance. The Stoics thought that logic was connected to ethics, because if we cannot reason well about practical matters, then we are also unlikely to act well. The Roman Stoic philosopher Seneca explicitly linked the notion of logical reasoning and the virtues in a simple way in his 66th letter to his friend Lucilius. He wrote, "Virtue is nothing else than right reason." Let me conclude by turning to the Stoic idea of the dichotomy of control. It allows us to translate the notion of living according to nature into a practical philosophy of life. This notion goes back to Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism. But its most famous rendition is found right at the beginning of Epictetus' Manual of Stoic Ethical Advice, the Enchiridion. Epictetus wrote, "Some things are within our power, while others are not. Within our power are opinion, motivation, desire, aversion, and in a word, whatever is of our own doing. Not within our power are our body, our property, reputation, office, and in a word, whatever is not of our own doing." As it turns out, this sentiment is found in a number of other cultures and time periods as well. For instance, the 20th century Christian serenity prayer states, "God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference." Solomon ibn Gabirol, an 11th century Jewish philosopher, expressed the idea this way: "At the head of all understanding is realizing what is and what cannot be, and the consoling of what is not in our power to change." Shantideva, an 8th century Buddhist scholar, wrote, "If there is a remedy when trouble strikes, what reason is there for dejection? And if there is no help for it, what use is there in being glum?" Now, let's go back to Epictetus' version and take a closer look. He divides things into two major categories: what's under our control and that which is not under our control. The first group includes our judgments, opinions, and values. The second group includes our own body, our reputation, career, and wealth, among other things. But wait a minute. Did Epictetus and other authors I just mentioned not realize that other people influence our judgments, values, and so forth? And do we not influence our body, reputation, career, and so on? Yes, influences go both ways. But ultimately, in the case of my opinions and values, the buck stops with me. Others might try to convince me, say, that Mozart was a better composer than Beethoven. But if I end up endorsing this conclusion, then that is my judgment, my responsibility. Contrariwise, I certainly can influence my body, say by eating a healthy diet or going to the gym. But disease or accident can strike at any moment, and the final outcome, so to speak, is not really up to me. Why does this matter? Because as Stoics, Christians, Jews, and Buddhists will tell you, Understanding the dichotomy of control means that, practically speaking, we should focus on the things that are up to us and accept the rest for what it is. That translates into internalizing our goals. We should concern ourselves with our intentions and efforts, which are under our control, and develop an attitude of equanimity toward outcomes, which are not under our control. Do not worry about whether you will get that promotion at your job. Do concern yourself with whether you've done everything possible to obtain that promotion. Do not worry about whether your spouse loves you. Do concern yourself with whether you're a loving person, and so on, for pretty much everything that happens in your life. The theory is simple, the practice difficult. But if we truly internalize the dichotomy of control, Epictetus makes a huge promise in the Enchiridion.